The Pope leaned forwards. The Pope leaned forwards, a sort of viscous purple foam dribbling from the corners of his mouth. Fools they were, fools they are, and fools they shall ever be. Men who look to us to enable their fantasies as being in any sense special, as being in any sense more worthy than a blind mole rat, a cockroach, a cancer cell. He is lashed to fate no less than any of them, and not a whit better. Nay, far less good, on account of his sickening vanity. He, they, all, are just the froth, the spittle of an unthinking nature, steam boiling off the arse of the brainless demiurge, whose laws cause this, cause that, no one thing worth any more than any other. When a man harms himself, or harms others, there is much fuss made, but nature bats not an eye. Creation and destruction are as one to her. Continue to babble on about these absurd mysteries. They are useful, they enrich us, they keep us much in the rabble's mind, fill their puny minds with awe, respect, the notion that they are part of something noble, even eternal, in any event, far bigger than themselves. It is indeed true that they are a part of something far bigger than themselves, nature, which cares not whether they strut about congratulating themselves on their spirituality and wisdom, or are hung from a meat hook in a factory farm. In point of fact, it very much seems that she prefers the latter, and that the most barbarous, abominable monsters in human history are, to her, its greatest heroes. And, let's be honest, the ignorant people very much sense this as well. They are still very happy to talk and think about Neros, Genghis Khans, Hitlers. Those whom they describe as virtuous cause them only to fall into apathetic stupors. There is a part of them that knows full well that we deal only in lies and machinations, that the ashes and soil from whence they arose and to which they shall return are every bit as important to nature as all the pompous nonsense that comes out of their mouths and pens. Every bit of rubbish we tell them serves only to prop them up in their own eyes, to make them seem, to themselves, better than those around them. And this is nature's most basic law, that, at the end of the day, we care only about ourselves, and about no others. When we claim, or some of us claim, that we care about others, we reveal only that we care about the way those others cause us to feel. That is the long and the short of it. Every priest has known this since the dawn of history. We deal in lies, lies which enrich us, and enable us to molest and abuse the ignorant rabble, at the same time that they are soothed by them. Every guru, monk, rabbi, they all know this perfectly well. It is their stock and trade, they are highway robbers, and nonsense is their arsenal, the weapon with which they rob, pillage, and wreak havoc. You ask if I, and people in my employ, who do my bidding, and who are privy to what it is, we do feel remorse. Such a silly question. Once the scales have fallen from your eyes, to deceive, to manipulate, to rob, these things become virtues in a cold, barren universe, which operates only in accordance with its cold, barren laws. One revels in it. One feels part of a larger, transcendent reality, the reality of evil. We are evil, and are proud to be so, for in so being, we reflect what the world is, at bottom, and encourage that reality to flourish. Look to, and in that pond, the most lovely of surfaces, a holocaust, beneath. Look to the dust mites on your face, on your pillowcase. Look to the brutal wars apace, every moment in your bloodstream. Look to your marriage. Look to your friends. Look to the cashier at the drugstore, who would be a Nero had he or she the opportunity. Look to yourself, who would be he as well, in a heartbeat. In a heart beaten and dragged out of its owner, stomped upon, dragged through the dirt, and fed to whatever rodent was sufficiently famished to gorge itself upon it. Look most to the women, the mothers, daughters, siblings, their tongues wagging, their daggers constantly poised, redolent of fetid swamps, harbouring blind anacondas, devouring helpless crocodiles, who themselves, but a moment ago, had dragged a child or man from the shores, and shook him violently as it began to devour him, much to the delight of that pampered aristocratic lady who had borne him, and who now sat by the waters, that babbled on all about the execution taking place within them, fanning herself, pouting, and contemplating ways in which to further deceive, and eventually disembowel her husband, the Count. Look to their wombs, which dry into a putrid cesspool of useless filth midway through their journey through life, although they are, as a rule, more than happy to soldier on into their future bodies of wrinkled leather, their voices having become those of eviscerated ravens, their souls intent on only the basest of pleasures and the most venomous of treacheries. Recall how they suckled the grovelling, grasping turds which shot out from between their thighs all those years ago, in disgust, in anticipation of formula or of their wet nurse, in deepest resentment for the hell they were in, and for the many hells to come. Adopting the pose of pre-Raphaelite angels, they looked smugly down upon their charges, delighting in the infamies they were soon to inflict upon them. For what is heaven other than the joy of looking down? Barring that pleasure, of happiness there can be none. They are the fractious, fractal offshoots of the heartless mother herself, the one who spews her creation everywhere, she who pisses and shits it upon globe after globe, here and throughout the miserable universe of which she is landlord, delighting in the pissing, in the shitting, though remaining certain that the persecution and devastation of those creations will afford her, and them, infinitely more delight, to procreate, to nurture. Those are the properties and behaviours of those who would call themselves virtuous. They are not remotely virtuous. They are nauseating abominations, spewing themselves, their spunk, their excrement, their children into a world which is already overrun with far more than enough of their filth and of their kind. A noble mother! Ah, it is so rarely that we find one, but when we do, rest assured, they are juggling infants on pitchforks and bathing in the blood of innocents. Such creatures, such marvels, would that the demiurge were not a blind beast, subject to laws. Would that we could implore him to set loose a race of billions of harpies, such as these, on the face of this globe, and of every other, delicious, deeply bloodthirsty Amazons, never satisfied with the murder of a few, with drinking the blood and eating the hearts of only her own children, rather, bent on the destruction of all creatures, of all things, of the universe itself. In this she shall never succeed, but her attempt is nature's most luscious and voluptuous flower, its culmination and consummation, the glorious, corpse-heaped crown of creation. And this love fools profess to have for such creatures, this despicable evisceration, this castration of what a man is, of what a man might otherwise be, how we men grovel and live for breadcrumbs scattered by such scorpions, on deserts of scraggly pubic hair, inhabited by dust mites and crabs, parcelled out, like so many Machiavellis on picnics, to rivals whom they fully intend to poison, smiling to themselves, all the while, as they are flattered, like queens who, the moment our fortunes recede, or hairs begin to whiten, or when they spy another, whom they imagine possesses a bigger cock, perhaps spouting gold, or made of chocolate, will grab the sharpest implement they can find, and stab us lethally and deeply in our bowels, sever our testicles, and feed them to squirrels, laughing, shrieking like hyenas all the while, at our naivete, our gullibility, and, above all, what was our raw, naked need. Needs which cause fools, such as we are, to ascribe to these harpies charms which a Petrarch could not have imagined. Everything that is vile about her now becomes a virtue, every disgusting imperfection a proof of her supernatural beauty, every absurd piece of nonsense that pours out of her poisonous lips a sign of her wisdom. Yet wisdom she does possess, and of a sort so murderous that any thinking man will not allow himself to entertain even the faintest notion of this love of which the fools babble on endlessly about in their idiotic songs and poems and entertainments, designed only to hoodwink morons into the perfidious, putrid Ponzi scheme of procreation, Closer inspection inevitably eats away at this foul illusion, erodes it, until what had been, up till then, adoration is now the purest horror, contempt, and hatred. One finally begins to realize that this is a creature who reliably, and without fail, turns what might have been one's good humor into the foulest disrepair. A creature who possesses no curiosity, no humor, no sense of awe or wonder, who has only the wish to enslave some poor man, in order that he shoot spunk into that pustule-filled tunnel of spunk between her thighs, and, hence, provide her with a crotch turd, which she can then hatch, with and by whom she can soothe herself, tell herself that there is some reason for her existence on this shithole planet, that is to say, that this earthworm now sucking at her mangled, deformed tit is a sign that she need not loathe herself, that she is a something, a legend, an angel, spinning threads of eternity through time and space, a hole through which divinity has poured itself, like an arsenic-laced discount liqueur guzzled by a drunken demiurge on a fourth-rate comet, careening through some butthole of a solar system in the not even armpit of a perfectly undistinguished galaxy, spinning its way towards a collision with another, which will swallow it without a burp or a thought, in a pointless, finite, death-driven universe. The fool's dick snaps to attention, sings a love song of Schubert, or, more likely, of some talentless nitwit of his contemporary acquaintance, is tugged along by this ethereal, crotch, turd, yearning, begging, shrieking to be born, and shoved into a malodorous, skanky hole of the Komodo dragon whom he now embraces, and who is hell-bent on ripping those genitals off, in a single vicious bite, once their contents have warmed the venomous eggs festering in her polluted womb. Had these foolish men the meagerest of imaginations, they would have known, seen, recoiled in horror from what they would soon realize was that fetid cesspool sitting between those thighs, that rancid canyon, poised to cast out dozens more worms, if it's given the opportunity. And that casting, do picture it. Picture this treasure, this angel, this gelatinous, screaming blob of squirming, pus, and mucus-filled flesh, pushed out of that hole which you a moment ago worshipped as if it were the altar upon which lay your deepest desires and joys. This putrid, stinking gulf, where those two, mismatched, wrinkled, saggy, stubby thighs meet in a tangle of perfectly disgusting, matted hairs which shoot this way and that, a forest of foul lichens, of pestiferous moss, so unseemly that were you to see it on a forest floor, you would kick it away contemptuously, after having pissed on it. And what of those flaccid bags of meat, those misshapen, wrinkled globes of swaying flesh, with their never-matching, bizarrely misshapen nipples, which, when closely inspected, are things of the purest horror, meant only to deceive and entice you now, in order that they might squirt scum into the greedy mouths of stench-filled turds months later? But no, perhaps it is that other side of her, where her most delightful charms are to be found, in those two mountainous bowls of stinking, discoloured viands, hovering over and sheltering that foul, rancid hole, from which pours shit of a sort with which you are more than a little familiar, for you yourself have become this shit, a shit which she herself can mould and ply into a slave of her own invention, to debase and discard as she wishes. Ah, no, 'tis not the body you worship, but of course, it is her delicate, noble, angelic soul, or so it seems to you, up until that moment when your spunk spills, and your idiotic swooning has ceased, and you are faced with the lies, the shrewish, scolding tongue, that God-forsaken voice of a shrieking cat, the pettiness, spitefulness, nagging, the infinite stupidity, the whorish machinations, cloaked in paper-thin protestations of prudery, the cawing of ravens, the stinging of scorpions, the eviscerations and soul murders of which she is such a master. Ah, 'tis these things you cherish. And if and when you have been thus caught, dragged into the web of her machinations, of assisting her in the spawning of some future piece of filth, which shall walk the earth, thanks to your imprudence and naivete, when you now see what it is she had been all along, how she had planned this from the start, whether she was aware of it consciously or not, how her character and essence was and is nothing other than a Venus flytrap designed to entice and then destroy you. When this it is that you have come to see clearly, you will either sink into the most hopeless despondency, or, after a period of the blindest rage, sometimes culminating in the awful revenge, enter that clear-sighted state of wisdom in which women appear to you as what they are: abominations, scourges, the very worst of the earth's most foul pestilences. And so, my friends, to what do we now turn our thoughts to, pray tell? Perhaps you've dodged that bullet, or perhaps, having been shot, you are soldiering on. As what? As whom? What is left for you, after you've eaten of this delicious food, and are now satiated, after you've had your way with what previously seemed the delightful body of some whore, and are now left disgusted and horrified, after the superficial wonders and beauties of the natural world have fallen away, and revealed the chains of holocaust upon holocaust beneath? Perhaps 'tis time, once again, to inspect that delightful cavity of your beloved, its mucosal walls, its irregular ridges, which provide such an agreeable home to an assortment of bacteria and fungi, those stringy, fibrous muscles, which help to expel the various fluids from said hole, the rubbery, elastic tissue which allows your beloved's gaping crater to stretch sufficiently to allow crotch turd after crotch turd to emerge, to be shat into the world, there to weep, grow old, and die. All those asymmetrical folds of skin, in all their blubbery riot, at times seemingly sufficiently ambitious to cover the beloved gash itself, that hole up top, through which your angel pisses. Oh, the ecstasy! Is it not enough to make one drunk with joy? This pinkish raw meat, with its endless ridges and folds, so often full of the rankest cottage cheese and fishy-smelling discharges, is this not heaven on earth? Behold it, in all its glory, worship at its altar, drink deep of its endless flora, smelling so distinctly like the bottom of a stinking, fetid landfill. Let its odour intoxicate you with memories, dreams, hopes, a veritable Madeleine of Proust, in need of 1,000 douches and antibiotic regimens, yet, nevertheless, divine, because it is hers. Whether it be yellow, green, greyish, white, odourless, or smelling like an overflowing Beijing sewer pipe, 'tis the body and blood of Christ. Drink and eat of it, for, in doing so, thou shalt be saved, and ever more so, when, if fortune smiles upon you, you find, to your delight, various irritations, sores, blisters, pustules, abscesses, cankers, and swellings, which she has received as a gift given, unbeknownst to you, by some rival whom she prefers, and which you soon find belong to you, as well. My treasure, my angel, how can I ever repay you this gift, which you bestow upon me, so freely, and with such energy, nay, such blameless, guiltless, artless energy? Well, there you have it, my friend, the sour, stinking cunt, out of which you, and all those you have ever, and will ever meet, have been shat, quite without your consent. Perhaps you imagine that you had been a tad happier, prior to said shitting, bathed, as you were, in the foulness of the womb of the she-devil who bore you, but you would be wrong. Locked in that bestial prison of sour gas and poisonous fluid, you were, at that time, in a state of unimaginable torture, a mindless misery, for which you yet had no words with which to soothe yourself or attempt to explain it all away, and from which, now that you are embodied, you shall never escape. Look at yourself, you filthy insect, with that revolting spittle dribbling down towards your chin, unbeknownst to you, but clear enough to those unfortunate to catch sight of you, with your stomach grinding away on dozens of corpses, the hairs in your nose, in your armpits, sprouting everywhere like stalks of toxic fungi, harbouring countless microscopic monsters busily chewing on you, and laughing, all the while picturing and busily engineering your death, at which time, said chewing will only continue, unabated, and with, as likely as not, all the more vigour and delight. It is only they who are not utterly disgusted by your pasty white skin, drooping furiously like toilet paper, dangling from a discarded mannequin, hanging on in its fruitless struggle against nothingness and death. skin-bearing mouths, and eyes unable to speak, to give voice to the horror, eyes without lids, staring in perpetual horror upon itself, that waxen straitjacket in which you cannot move, in which you do not belong, which wrenches violently back, at times in despair, at others, in the agony of its colon, sloughing off its lining, all the while the nails, growing like daggers, on hands busy rotting, legs limping, stumbling helplessly along, in search of help, camaraderie, some minimal assurance, all of which will never come. You are a carnival of horrors, trapped in a body you had hoped was meant to, and would eventually embrace others, but that you now see is just this thing with armpits, ears full of wax, this thing that creates shit, and then compels you to expel or retain it when and as it wishes, without consulting you. You would claim you are not this body, that the body is an abstraction, that you are something other than this trash bag of shit, piss, blood, sinew, and bone, that you are something other than your corporeal form, something miraculous, and not this cruelest of jokes, that sex is a stained glass window, opening upon the divine, the transcendent, and not simply a concatenation of sweat, spittle, stink, and lies, that you something other than a meat puppet, a marionette, a figurine into whose arsehole Yaldabaoth, the Gnostic demiurge, shoves his bony hand to make it twitch this way or that, to think this or that thought, to desire, to endlessly covet and crave, with neither purpose nor any hope of ever being satisfied. You stagger around under the absurd illusion that your body is something which obeys your will, that it is not merely a playground of random pains, yoked, as it is, like the sorriest of donkeys, to the most pitiless and brutal of masters, on the most arduous and ill-advised of journeys, to its cravings, to its wishes and desires, which you realize are absurd, meaningless, disgusting, to its, and hence your terrors, to your intuition that it might be only a moment until your chest bursts open for no apparent reason, revealing a monstrous, gaping, eyeless face, with a drooling, famished mouth housing seemingly hundreds of bony teeth, to your obsession with this body, but not that body. No, 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 not that one. I must have this one, and it must profess to love me, and, of its own accords. That is what shall most certainly put things right. But this we have discussed, above, more than sufficiently. You are a tube, with holes at either end, nothing more, needing, wanting. Your entire existence is nothing other than this constant, needing, wanting, and the world about you. It is nothing. It exists only as the instrument which either pleases or displeases you. Do with it as you wish, for it is not real. It has never been real. Those who told you it was real were lying. They, and it, were, and are, eminently dismissible, and exist in your mind only, in order that they might satisfy or exasperate you. A dream, from which you can now awaken, if you so choose, to viciously embrace and violate the world. In what is, it must be admitted, only another dream, but this latter dream is one in which you are now God himself, both chess master and board, all its players subservient only to you, existing only as puppets with which you can do as you please, which you are free to make of what you will, that you can embrace, cast away, ignore, treat with toleration or contempt, as the spirit moves you, who exist only as much as that curious being, in some half-forgotten dream, who emerged from shadows and fog and began to strut about, as if he mattered, was known to you, deserved this or that, but who, in reality, was no more than a puff of smoke, with less reality than an earthworm, a chimera, whom you might just as well impale on a harpoon, as have a satisfying conversation, a ghost, as are they all, those at the shop, in the park, who claim to care, though they surely don't, and for whom, in moments of weakness, you attempt to convince yourself that you care, that most absurd of fantasies, which still lingers pointlessly in your mind, because nonsense of this sort had been poured into your ears and down your throat all those years ago by other phantoms, who mattered then and now exactly as much as that self-important hobgoblin who swaggered last night through your dream, and whose throat you now regret not having slit with a disinterested smile, to be forgotten a moment later. We are alone, caged within ourselves, at the same time that this solitude, this transcendental solipsism, is the ultimate freedom. The play within our minds is vast, is infinite. These creatures that appear to us as if they are out there, in a world, are no such thing. They are a bit of undigested beef, as Scrooge told Marley. And when this Marley and his peers convinced Scrooge of this or that, 'twas only a play within the miser's mind, which he was too ignorant to recognize as such. This world one sees, in which one appears to move about, is but a panopticon of one's own invention, in which the entertainments, punishments, and pleasures one ascribes to things, to persons, to nature, are nothing other than the echoes in one's own mind of a previous vibration, itself an echo, and on, into the primordial mists of a nothingness from which it all arose, and to which it is presently speeding, borne on a raging sea of desires, compelled to live in a prison of one's own invention, for the world is nothing other than that, penned in this prison, yoked to these desires, we wish to change what seems to us some undesirable thing or situation, which we have, in fact, created, and are now, without knowing it, involuntarily discovering ways to circumvent. Our fears and hopes melt into one another, into joys and disappointments, and 1,000 other things, sensations and feelings in the space of an hour, nay, in the space of a minute, like crickets thrown over a waterfall, morphing into butterflies and scorpions, and back again, in an eye blink. One's memory of an earlier time, nay, of an earlier moment, belonging to that self-same day, is a history of some other person, who thought himself momentarily stable, as you do now, although you ought know better, for you have been drowned in this vortex, sucked into this abyss, and spat out again, unrecognizable, an infinite number of times. You are filled with this hunger, this passion, this disgust, this longing, this boredom, this rage, this despair, and poof, you are another, with suddenly another set of no less absurd preoccupations and assumptions, which have about as much connection to those of that fellow of but a moment ago, as the musings of a ferret have to those of a Komodo dragon. To be a brain in a vat, such as we are, is no ignoble thing. It is contemptible only to wish it to be otherwise, to pine for the love of another, who exists only in one's own mind. This is not some despicable stoic nonsense, for the wise man does nothing other than to give free rein to his passions, to mount and ride them like a stallion in a whirlwind. Yes, they are phantoms which you are chasing, and what of it? Do you not enjoy your dreams? Are you not God himself in those dreams, be they wonderful or nightmarish? Do you not feel ecstasies, shudder in horror, writhe in anticipation over characters in novels, to whom you feel infinitely closer than to those phantoms that walk around that world which is also of your own invention? But it is all the same, my friend, exactly the same. Absurd, wonderful, revolting, fantastic, contemptible. This life, it is not rounded by a little sleep. It is this sleep, nothing other. You are dreaming yourself. You are dreaming your body, the world, all of it. And so, do with it as you like, as your character demands, as it whispers, and at times bellows, into your ears. Fuck, kill, poison, eviscerate. And if you find yourself doing something as execrable and absurd as to love another, do recall that this absurdity is taking place in only one location, in your bowels, which themselves are a thing of your own invention. She is not out there. She is you, and only you. I've gone far afield from any semblance of my papal role, for that role, as I have said, is one in which I say all this only to myself, in a dream in which you appear, you, who are nothing other than illusion with whom I presently dally to entertain myself, for there is nothing else to do in this vacuum, in this black hole, in this one-horse universe, which is, and has ever been, only myself. It is of no concern whether this self is the self of the purest and most naked solipsism, or that which is portrayed in the fairy tales of the Upanishads, or those of George Berkeley, we haven't the faintest clue whether this world is our dream alone, or if, rather, we are only a bit of that world, dreaming itself. You will say that Tom, Dick, and Harry observe the very same tree as I, and hence claim a material reality for that world. And yet, do they not do every bit as much in my dream? And so they appear to now, as well, whether, when I feel as if I am awake, I dream still, or I am simply a dream persona in some cosmic mind. I do not give a fig, which is the case, nor should you. Your loves, enemies, passions, griefs, concern nothing other than yourself, are merely your inner eye, landing upon a part of yourself, which had been to you previously opaque. They have naught to do with what a foolish man considers others, or this or that, out there, in a world, which, were he wiser, he would recognize as existing only in himself. Those others with whom you converse, or whom you read, are, for the most part, the most virulent of distractions, from the love of oneself, in quiet solitude, in whose environs bubble up what is best and most joyful in us. They are parts of you best ignored, bits of snot on tissue paper, which you regret examining for too long a time, when you should have simply immediately discarded them. And yet there can be that occasional unicorn, that exceptional encounter with what is ultimately oneself, though it appears to be in the words and minds of others, a bolt of lightning, which illumines the sky, a sky which was there within you, all along, but which the dreaming earth had heretofore hidden from you. And it is at such times that you are entranced by a piece of music, a work of visual art, of literature, a natural scene, a word or words from a beloved friend, all of which was within you prior to any awareness of it, or of them, on your part, prior to your birth, which was nothing other than the birth of the world, which you see around you, and is yourself, that unknown country from which your own thoughts and words emerge, that too is, and was, you, and only you, all along. And so, with these mirages, phantasms, these fancies which you, in your naivete, deem persons, things, events, you may do as you please, for the only law the wise man follows is that of his own pleasure. He regards the sufferings of others as not only of no consequence, but as things to enjoy, as entertainments, and knows that any pangs of ridiculous conscience or empathy which stir in him are but echoes of this or that bit of nonsense drummed into his unwilling ears as a child who was far more content to pull the hair of little girls, to throw rocks at them, to pull the wings off butterflies, and terrorize small reptiles. A pure child, a thing of nature. But let us not stop there, for it is our own suffering which is most delicious to us, when we feel said suffering as only our own, neither belonging to, nor experienced by another, when we do not ascribe said suffering to some dream persona we have invented, some fantasy extrinsic to ourselves which is nothing other than ourselves. This is the purest of delights and exhilarations it is possible for a man to know. The delicious tastes and aromas of betrayal, rejection, physical pain, loneliness, boredom, dysphoria, horror, terror, existential torments and tribulations, deepest grief. It is only at these times that one feels most alive, and, indeed, that one feels and is most alive. Happy, carefree moments are those we readily and happily offload to morons and cretins, to the fools that live for what is soporific and anodyne, who run giddily into the arms of a culture which happily lobotomizes them, and by which they are more than pleased, intensely relieved, in fact, to be so lobotomized. For a sensitive soul, there are only disappointments, punctuated by momentary pleasures, which go off like Roman candles in the blackest of night skies, never to be retrieved. There are no people, no beings in this world of ours, only ideas, all of which are our own. It is in them we live. And is there a single idea which weakens, exhausts, and enervates a man more than the notion of being a good man, a virtuous man? And is there one which enlivens him more than being a bad one? Of inflicting and delighting in his own and in others' suffering. There is not only a fool, a blind mole-rat of a man, a snivelling woman, nay, a weepy little girl in the body of a man would deny it. And, needless to say, those enlivenings, those vivifications, those greatest pleasures to which a man can attain, consist, primarily, in his inducing suffering in others. To provoke them in some poor animal is of no consequence. There's nothing in that, neither pleasure nor nobility, for the beasts are utterly unknowing and innocent. No, it is man in whom one must thrust the knife, up the arsehole and into his very bowels, while taking great care to look him full in the face, and eyes with the chilliest and most self-satisfied of smiles. For these things, these seeming creatures that pass you by, these things to whom, in your more weak-minded moments, you attribute personhood, in whom you are sometimes tempted to imagine an inner world as vast and rich as your own, these things, I say, are nothing other than you yourself, no more worthy of consideration or kindness than is the shit you just flushed down the upstairs toilet, though, granted, not without having first taken a good, long look at it, full of the most delicious interest and inquisitiveness, an interest akin to that which you feign in the words that gurgle from the throats of these phantoms, who are none other than you, these dream figures, concocted by you to provide merriment and annoyance, that particularly delicious merriment, which results only from annoyance, constructed by you to distract you, not from the shit you just flushed down the upstairs toilet a moment ago, but from the shit that you yourself are, that, randomly fluctuating, momentarily amassing bit of flotsam which, but a moment later, becomes something quite other, a new, other, less familiar self, other, yes, but no less wearisome and awful, consisting only of more endless, idiotic running about, of projects with which you attempt to momentarily convince yourself you're not a hair's breadth from a ghastly death, of countless plans and exploits in which none of the dream phantoms you happen to have pulled out of your arse that morning ever have the slightest interest. Perhaps you should sleep then. That might help, no? Or, rather, perhaps masturbate? But then there's always that gaping abyss, which so inevitably and immediately opens up, once you've managed to squirt, that black hole of misery which opens in your bowels a moment after having finished, of disgust with the vile, slimy gunk on your fingers and clothes, mixed, as it is, with no small fraction of curiosity and pride, but revulsion, over and above all, with yourself, with this world into which you have been thrown, or, more accurately, into which you have thrown yourself, upon whom might you unload your misery? Perhaps, were you to find someone to embrace, perhaps fuck, some dream phantom whom you could pretend is out there, once again, someone who is somehow capable of knowing you, who gives a damn whether you live or die, who professes to love you, but your dream phantoms are as vile, as self-involved, and as profoundly incomprehensible as what you know, understand, and experience as yourself. What you are busy doing is not much other than refining the grimace with which you will greet yourself in the mirror that next unfortunate time you encounter it, making the image that much more hideous, more distorted, and more filled with a rage that would not be content had it the power to blot out the Milky Way and all the life contained within it, that which we know, and that which must surely exist elsewhere within it, all of it bound to be as vile as the life and existence with which we are familiar. For it too, the planet on which it arises, the doubtless gelatinous mucus and scum of which it is composed, is none other than one's self, none other than you. Soldier down, that you might achieve what it is life wants and requires of you, to attain to that profoundest sorrow, that towards which you have been moving your entire life, to feel it, quite entirely as yourself, at the moment of your expiring. For all your philosophizing, your mad scribblings, your engaging with these phantoms for the odd moment, only to experience the inevitable boredom laced with disgust after not more than an hour, the desperate necessity of getting away. You then feel, these things are born of nothing, other than your cowardice, your pretense of your pretentious cowardice. You create, in these phantoms, so many cunts and cocks and snouts and pricks and arseholes and sweat and spittle and stink. Why is it, pray tell, that you have failed, over and over again, to create a heart? Oh yes, didn't you do just that, at 20, for a period of a few months, or so you told yourself at the time? A story whose potency lasted only for those months, and no longer, to be followed by the cultivation of a swinnishness so insistent and appalling that any poetry which had burned within you, for a moment, like a tiny, store-bought birthday candle on the cake of the brat you once were, was squashed, stomped endlessly upon, murdered, many times over, not into some artifact of poetry or prose, mind you, no, rather into the snot drying within, and dripping from that appalling nose of yours, into the stink emanating from your unwashed armpits, into the shit to which you, but a moment ago, were busy waving goodbye, into the spunk greasing your grubby fingers, wiped off on an unwashed leg or pair of too often worn jeans, upon which you assume it will not be seen or remarked upon by the next incorporeal goblin whom you have dreamed up and then upon whom you have happened to chance. You live now only for your hatred, your greatest pleasure, nay, not your greatest, for that term makes no sense. You live now only for hatred, your only pleasure, all that is left to you. You speak, and the words disgust you. You notice only the vile, slobbery origins of that speech, the worm that is your tongue darting this way and that over a regimen of decaying, brownish teeth, the poisonous spittle moistening your lips, or occasionally sucked back down your gullet, the words bubbling up from a black hole of nothing, some dismal, incomprehensible abyss, which are always a surprise to you, a source of amusement on rare occasions, but more often of horror. You speak, and are diverted from that next inevitably inconsequential thought by the smell of yourself, which you somehow neglected to notice heretofore. This body, this disguise, this meat suit, donned by temporarily aligning viscera, molecules, this body both revolts and is revolting to others and to ourselves. It revolts, first and foremost, against our demand for it to not come immediately apart, to not meet the fate of the shit we just flushed down the upstairs toilet. Our body is neither more nor less than that shit, and it is striving, constantly striving, to slit the throat of that abominable farce of having been sewn together and forced to behave as if it were a self, of having to endure, of not suddenly detonating in the Hiroshima of its dreams, of its constant itching and inclination to be undone, to spew itself across the universe in an ecstasy of sputtering, nonsensical, divine, ecstatic madness, mayhem, and pandemonium. That time will not come in some mysterious, abstract future. It is happening right now, constantly gaining force and increasing its speed. Lie back and enjoy it. Embrace the shit. The upstairs toilet waits patiently, rather, more than a little impatiently, for quite a bit more than tomorrow's morning shit. Ask not for whom it waits for you.